It's ad break time. Welcome back to season 10 of the Beyond Solitaire podcast. I'm proud to announce that this podcast remains sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And this week, they will be launching Greg Loring-Albright's Keep the Faith on Backerkit. It is a light RPG about the evolution of a new religion, and I wrote the curriculum guide for it. So you already know I think it's great. And in fact, this upcoming episode is devoted to that game. So keep an eye out for it. I will also mention that if you want to support this podcast, please visit patreon.com/beyondsolitaire and help me keep the lights on. But for now, let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson with Beyond Solitaire, and welcome to season 10 of the Beyond Solitaire podcast. I'm here with my very first guest of the season, a repeat guest actually. This is Greg Loring-Albright. He is a game designer. He's an assistant professor of games, media, and culture at Harrisburg University, and he's here to talk to us about his upcoming game, Keep the Faith. How you doing, Greg?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Liz. I'm glad to be back. It's always nice to show up again and talk to people a second time. So thank you.
Yes, I was super fun to hang out. So tell us about Keep the Faith. I know it's coming to Backerkit very soon.
Yes. So Keep the Faith is coming to Backerkit, as you said, to be a Central Michigan University Press, friend of the show, sponsor of the show.
Sponsor of the show.
That's right. And actually, as Liz knows, but as listeners maybe don't know, Liz was central in getting this game signed. I was working on this as just kind of like a back burner fun project. And I know Liz has a background in academic religious studies. And I said, hey, can you play my game? I really want your opinion. And she played it. She was like, I know someone who would publish this. I was like, what? This was not really, all my games is sort of it'd be nice to get it published. But this was one that was just for me and I was having fun with it. And Liz made the connection and then Central Michigan University signed it. And now Liz is writing the curriculum guide. So huge overlaps, giant synergies, as the corporate bros say.
Yes. But when I played your game, I was super excited by the kinds of questions that it was asking, and we can talk more about that. I actually would be happy to share some of my experiences playtesting it with students. But just to kind of get the backstory, since you're doing the game for yourself, what made you decide to make it, and what instinct was driving that theme and that's the structure that you started with?
Yeah, it's a good question. In another overlap, I see your Leader Games shirt, right? It's I was listening to and reading Cole talk about Oath in the very, very early days before the game existed, before any test kits were released, and this notion of a game about institutional memory. And that really just I really connected with that idea. I was like, oh, that's cool, right? Games are about systems, institutions are about systems. This seems like a good thematic mechanical overlap. And so after listening to Cole talk about sort of the very early ideas for Oath, I started working on this game that was okay, what about, Cole has a PhD in the history of the British Empire or whatever, Victorian literature, and I don't, right? So I was hey, that's not what my game's going to be about, right? But I grew up very religious. I grew up in a relatively conservative church, and so I was oh, religion, that's an institution I'm intimately familiar with and can meditate on its changing. And so that's kind of what got me started on this game. And I just kind of was noodling around with it. And I was I know this is a hot button topic. So I wasn't thinking about it for publication. I would just get it out and play test it. And it was so much fun. And it was driving conversations and getting up in my head so much. I was I just got to keep play testing this game.
Excellent. Yeah, it's really funny. I wonder if the game struck me because I too kind of grew up with a healthy dose of conservative religion in my life and then got so interested in figuring out what I thought about it that I
right.
when I got a PhD in religious studies. We all process in different ways.
Truly. I've made this joke before about this game, but it's oh, some men will do X instead of going to therapy. And it's well, I designed a game about the thing, right?
Absolutely. But I feel the questions you ask are so on point. Do you see the game as something that gave you maybe a better or more understanding relationship with your religious past, or did you see it as a rebuke of that past?
No, it's definitely not a rebuke, right? I was also listening to and reading Amabel talk about Nicaea, which is another game that takes religion very seriously, but is also very sort of angry and funny about religion. And based on Annabelle's lived experience, of course, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. My game is not as angry, right? It is a game that has an embedded critique, but it's like I wanted from the get go, I wanted this game to be playable by people who were serious religious people and not feel like it was attacking them, even as it was trying to make them ask good questions. And so, the first time I played this game with my parents, both of whom are ordained Mennonite ministers, my dad said, "This game might be heretical," which was I was like, okay, like it's doing something. And then the second time he play tested it with me, he said, "I think they should use this in seminary classes." So that's like the needle I want to thread, right? Like I want to push people to ask hard questions about their own beliefs because that's what I was doing while I was designing the game. But I also don't like it's not to deconvert anyone, right? Like it's not a game that's trying to like be like all religion evil, get out of here, everyone. You know what I mean? Like it tries to take religion seriously and let you come to it on your own terms.
Absolutely. So for people who are thinking about this in a number of different contexts, like I felt like it was important to just answer that question right out because I think that when you ask questions about religion, people don't necessarily know how to take those questions. And I feel like
Yeah.
Keep the Faith is genuinely an exploratory game. And it's got kind of, in my opinion, it's got like 3 layers to it that I'd like you to expound on. One is sort of
Sure.
just the general tenets of religion. And you've got these like opposing views, like keep the secret, be very open. Those sorts of, embrace power, reject power.
Yeah.
You've got aspects of that religion that people are attaching to those larger tenets of faith. So you've got things like how do people dress? How do we handle the dead? How do we respect what is old versus what is new? All those sorts of like very salient religious questions. And then you've got like this overarching like idea of is the religion that you're building together going to stay together or is it going to break? And then what is orthodox? What is heresy? Were those
Yeah.
all originally things you wanted in the game? And how did you bring them together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take them backwards, right? So because the sort of again, I was sort of thinking about oath and like this notion of like institutions over time, right? And so this notion of like the schismatic and the orthodox and I think I call them the fractured ending and the stable ending, right? Where it's like you play this game over 5 rounds. Every round is like 100 years of in fiction time. And that 500-year number was chosen because of some like theological historians' views of like Christianity, right? Of like you have the Reformation in 1500, and before that there was I forget what the one in 1000 was, but anyway, I'm on a tangent. This notion of like throughout history, an institution can sort of be important in a time and then be less important, or something like the big 3, the big 5, whatever your model of religions is, like they're important, right? Like you can't do a history of the world and not talk about Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. Like these things are in the game. Those would be like the stable ending, right? Your world, your fiction needs to have an understanding of these things in order to make sense. So that was a big idea I was trying to grapple with, of like, what does it mean to hang together? What does it mean to attain cultural hegemony? Etc. Right. And then the second part, the aspects, which are these cards that are like, okay, right, like you were saying, like how do we handle the dead? What is our music like? What do we wear? I wanted the game to be, because it's a storytelling game, because it's a game where I was really hoping to welcome in sort of like board gamers who are RPG curious, right, or people who don't know a lot or don't feel like they're creative enough to play storytelling games, and to like be very welcoming and gentle to like, yes, please come and tell this cool story together. So these are like narrative hooks, and I wanted things that were like physical and observable in the world, right? And then the last part at the sort of core of the game are these 6 values that are arranged in a circle. And yes, as you said, they're in opposites, right? There's 3 pairs of directly diametrically opposed beliefs. And so the game is about saying like, okay, if we believe that we should keep the secrets, what does our altar look like? And then as the game goes on, you move that card and you're like, okay, well, if we believe in welcoming everybody in and spreading the word, how does that change what our altar looks like? And in general, in my life, I try to query and take apart binaries and direct polar oppositions. That's not how I live. But in this game, I thought it was important to make these direct opposites exist, because part of what the game is about is like, okay, our religion believes X. Well, in 300 years, 500 years, we might come to believe the polar opposite of X. And that will not cause us cognitive dissonance because of how ideology changes and how religions function.
Interesting. So when it comes to those smaller actually, no, let's take a step back. So when it comes to like the larger aspects of religion, like the major tenets of it, how did you choose the ones that you chose? And
That's a great
do you
question.
still have two sets?
Yes. So right now there's the game has there's six. They're going to be like Tarot Plus, like jumbo size cards that are arranged in a circle of six on the table, and they're two sided. And so you could play, you could play with all side A or all side B, or you can mix and match as long as the two opposed ones, as long as this oppositional pair are both side A, the ones next to them could be side B. And I wanted to do that so that the game has some like replayability, and also so that people don't want to talk about like conversion or outreach that has been missionaries are hugely problematic, right? Like if you don't want to talk about that stuff in your game, you can flip the cards so that you're not going to be talking about that a lot. But how I arrived at these, I was doing some research. I was trying to like read scholarly papers on religion and think about like, are there theories of like what is at the core of a lot of religions? And I couldn't find good answers, probably because I'm not trained in religious history, and so I didn't really know where to look. But I like read a bunch of papers about sort of like what are things that are core beliefs of religions, and then I just picked the ones that were fun to talk about. But the game, I mean, the game does have space for player intervention in that like those things are not set, right? Mechanically, they all have a Roman numeral, and the game mechanics refer to the Roman numerals. But if you wanted to write your own set of six values to play the game with, as long as they were in three oppositional pairs and you assigned each one a Roman numeral from 1 to 6, the game would function. So if people are interested in like, exploring new beliefs, right? These six cards are like the beliefs. These are the things that you could like really say that your characters in the game care about strongly. You could do that.
And then the sort of smaller questions that you are having players answer in the context of those greater beliefs and principles. Where did they come from? Because honestly, what really struck me about the game the first time I play tested it was I thought those were great because they
Oh, thank
really
you.
gave me like a really good hook to start conversations with my own students, which we'll get to shortly. But
Yeah.
what made you what made you generate the ones that you did? Like what was your source material for that? Because they were just spot on for the kinds of things that you would want to ask.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. Almost solely my lived experience, with a few exceptions. But I made a card list when I wanted to start playtesting the game. I was like, I just thought about my own experiences in religions, and I was like, what did I see? What did I touch? What did I hear? Like what was my experience with religion, and how did it manifest physically? Because that's what these cards are about. And then every time I playtested, I would ask people. That was part of my like playtesting debrief, like, what do you want to see, right? Like you played this game. We talked about, the altar was in there pretty early, religious music was in there pretty early, and having people just say like, oh, like what is a thing that you would hope is in this deck that isn't in there? And then I also talked to some cultural consultants to ensure that the game doesn't just model conservative Christianity, right? Because that's my background and I'm drawing heavily on my own experience. And they gave me some good ideas of other things to add and cards to change to ensure that the way I was talking about these things wasn't exclusive of other religious traditions.
All right, so actually, I was saving this for later, but since you brought it up, it's just contextually good. So, actually, as I write the curriculum guide, my own challenge too is that my PhD is in ancient Christianity. Like,
Right, right.
I have a fixation, and so I've been also thinking about what kinds of lesson guidance can I give people and play guidance can I give that's not going to be super slanted in the direction of my own special interests. So, tell us about your experience with cultural consultants, the kinds of things that you were asked to change, and then how maybe that made you understand the topic of your game differently through those interactions.
Yeah, totally. The two people I talked to were ZW Garth, who's an indie RPG designer who is also practicing Hindu. And I got a ton out of that conversation because Hinduism structurally and functionally is very different from Christianity, right? It's a religion that like doesn't necessarily have a strict canon of belief. It has interesting like ideas about in groups and out groups. Like it's very hard to say, oh yeah, this person is like not a Hindu. I mean, well now in like India with like ethnic fascist stuff around Hindu identity, it is. But at a religious level, according to Zach, like this is a different kind of thing, right? And so it was really good to hear about that because the game models a faith that is kind of at a structural foundational level a lot like Christianity, right? It assumes you pray, it assumes you meet in a place, it assumes there's a bounded in group and out group of members and not members. And so he helped me change some of the wording so that you can create a faith that is more like Hinduism in the fiction, and that it doesn't kind of grate against the mechanics. So that was awesome. He also told me this great little anecdote about like stumbling upon a shrine to some Hindu deity in like a strip mall in suburban New Jersey and having this like profound religious experience. And so there's a card about shrines in the game now because of him. And then my friend Joel Swanson, Dr. Swanson, he teaches Judaism studies, Judaica studies. I forget what his professorship is called at Sarah Lawrence College now. But he and I are old undergrad friends, and yeah, his PhD was about how Christians' perceptions of and writings about Judaism in Europe in the 20th century kind of like shaped Judaism's own view of itself and inflected it with anti-Semitism. And so that's like, right, like that's like exactly what I am, right? Like I'm coming from a Christian perspective, creating texts about other religions. And so he gave me some really good guardrails about like, make sure you're not doing this and that and the other thing. And the card prophets and gadflies in particular, he was like, you're thinking about prophets in a very Christian way, and you should think about them in a more Jewish way. So yeah, great, incredible conversations with these folks.
Fantastic. So I really love that this game is as open as it is. So for those of you who are listening, I'm about to be describing what I do with a New Testament class, but I really think that you could do it with a history class. You could do it in a literature class that like has a religious component to something that you're reading, literally any of it. But the thing that I really loved about playing Keep the Faith with students. So I can't do that anymore because I now work full time for Leader Games, but I used to teach summer New Testament at a private school. And my students would kind of have a hard time connecting what we were learning in class with their own lives, even though it was a private Christian school. And this disconnect was really fascinating to me because I really wanted them to think about the text as vital and to think about their Sunday school as something that was supposed to have an impact on their week. Like for those of you who are out there, like I personally am a secular person, but I think that if you do religion, right, you take it seriously. And it was just really fascinating to have them see the New Testament as something that was so abstract to them. And we were talking about it as a historical text, but still, And so
Right,
some of these questions were just fantastic for getting them to kind of change their viewpoints. So even things like, how does food show up formally in the faith is one of the questions in the final version of this game. Or like, how does the faith treat things like song, theater, or representational art? And we were able to have conversations about how even within Christianity, which most of them practice, that there are huge variances about how people think that should be done. And so bringing together that sort of spiritual element with physical questions about how you do life as a member of a faith really got them talking about things in a different way. And I really enjoyed doing the Apostle Paul stuff right afterwards because, we're talking about like the formation of the church and like how people are supposed to act, the disagreements about Jews and Gentiles and men and women and, slaves and free people. And it was just fascinating to see differences in the way they were able to talk about the text because the game had trained them indirectly, even though they were making up their own religions, right, to talk about the kinds of things I was hoping they would start to spot.
Good. Oh, I'm so happy that's like when I first conceptualized this game, I did not conceptualize it as an educational game, but like that's exactly the kind of things I wanted the players to do with the game, and so I'm so glad to hear that they were doing it.
Yeah, I was very, very pleased with how easy it was to get better answers out of my students quickly because I had primed them with some of the questions in the game.
The best advertising for educators who are listening. This will get your students talking.
No, it's
all we want. Please answer a question.
So for those of you out there who teach high school and might use this, it's up to you what you do. I kind of forgot that there were drug and sex questions in the game that you can pull. So like you don't actually have to run the game with these things if you don't want to. But I'm actually kind of glad that I left them in because I didn't get any trouble and the students were fascinated. Like because we talk about things like purity and the Virgin Mary. Like you can't actually hide these things from teenagers after a certain point. So ultimately, like because they were a mature group, it was a small class, like I was able to handle it. It ended up being really good.
Nice. Because I mean, like at Sunday school, at youth group, like that's what you talk about. These things are like hugely important for religions, particularly conservative evangelical Christianity in the US.
Yes, but watching them get really creative with religions that they were making up was really funny because some of them would essentially make like a new Christianity. Some of them were making like these just totally bizarre fantasy religions, and they were clearly trying to be as weird as possible. And that honestly delighted me as well. Um,
Awesome.
and some students went really like bright and happy with it. Some students went kind of goth with it. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, not to like brag too much, but like I do think that is one of the strengths of the game. It's something I was being conscious of while I was designing. Is like I didn't want this to be a game where it was all down and it's like I mean like we live in a world right now where there's a religion that's doing very bad things politically to people. And I was like, okay, there is one version of this game where you always make that religion, right? Your religion always is like power hungry, oppressive, trying to kill the other, right? And but ultimately I didn't want to make a game that was always like that, right? You can play Keep the Faith and make that game, right? And make a commentary on Christofascism. But you can also play it like your students are playing it and like have a silly fun time and make a religion that is like just goofy and makes everyone laugh. And you can, make religions all up and in between.
So having play tested the game myself with some wild little children, it was great. What were your playtesting experiences like over time? And how did they drive changes that you made to the game to bring out what you wanted to see in your players?
Yeah, that's a good question. I again, as I said at the top, part of my design goals for this game was like making a game that board gamers who think they can't play RPGs or just people who are like nervous about storytelling and being creative in general can play and can like have a rewarding and fun time playing and be creative at the table. So a lot of my design changes and things I was watching for it in playtests were like, who is having trouble locking in? Who is having trouble saying something interesting? And how can I change the mechanics and presentation of the game to allow those people to talk more, basically? And so it's very structured. Right? Like I was inspired by, well, I have to shout out Fog of Love, Jacob Chaskov's kind of board game RPG hybrid, which kind of was one of the other early inspirations for this game. I was like, ooh, that's such a compelling space, right? Like you move the chips around, you have this like visual representation of a person's psyche and how they're gonna like love or not love another person. I was like, that's so cool, right? So that was something that inspired me. But also thinking about like storytelling, world building RPGs like The Quiet Year, The Companion's Tale, which like are great, but ask a lot of the players, right? You have to be willing to just like take a very minor prompt and just spin story out of it to play those games. And people who I play test with tend to be board gamers, and so they would have trouble playing those games. And I like playing those games. So I was like, how can I like bring these two things together, right? So I forget what your question was, but that's
yeah. How did you respond to playtesters over time, and like what kinds of changes did that make to the game?
yes, right. So basically, just like giving people more explicit narrative hooks, right? Like the cards began as just sort of like the card about like food, right? The header just says food. And I think in early drafts, I might have had a little bit of text beneath it, but really fleshing out the questions. Every card of an aspect of like a physical thing in the religion has like 6 lines of text of like 3 to 4 questions that you could answer. And when I'm teaching the game, I say you don't have to answer all of these, you don't have to answer any of these, but if you're stuck, answer 1 or 2 of these questions when you talk, and that will make the game move forward, right? So giving people lots of like places to hook in. I also relatively late in playtesting added in a sort of like external event system, right? Where it's like between each round, you draw a card, and based on where the tenet of the faith is, something happens in the world around you that's designed to sort of like bring in like socio-political aspects, so that the game intentionally doesn't have a setting. And so some players were saying like, oh, it would be easier for me to grip onto this narrative if we had established a setting. And so some players establish a setting at the start, and they're like, okay, we're going to make a religion to fit into the world of our ongoing D&D campaign, right? Cool. So that's great. Or some people are like, oh, like I played it with some students who were like, we're going to do an alternate history, like 1300s Europe, and then go 500 years from there. Cool. But other people are like, we're just going to start telling the story and see where it goes. And so these event cards that happen in between rounds are kind of like, okay, the empire falls, a famine, right? Like these things that influence religions and are influenced by religions, but kind of occur outside of them. And getting people to talk about that then gave some context, gave some depth to their world that they were creating.
Did your approaches to the game change when you realized that it was about to be published for more explicitly educational settings? And if so, what changes were made in response to that change in setting?
Shockingly, no. The game hasn't changed a ton since it got signed, which I'm very happy about. Yeah, I thought about like, okay, like what do I want to do to this game to make sure it's like, classroom usable, that it's like has like educational impact. But ultimately, I didn't change very much. I did think about taking out the sex and drugs cards, but as you said, like they're important. That's like things you talk about in a religion. I think the things I did think about were like kind of codifying and thinking through some of my inspirations and like reading a little more theory, reading a little more contemporary reporting on religious stuff, just to make sure I wasn't like making things up or like saying things that other people had said in a better way.
I do know that one of the things that changed throughout development was, I guess, the way the goals work. So,
Yes,
the
totally.
thing about a game is that, you have to give somebody a driving reason to play, which is usually winning, although go talk to Amabel Holland, right? Um, but, how do you balance between getting people to have a creative experience, which I think is what the game's really about, and then also have a motivation that keeps them going throughout the game?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I completely forgot about this like thread of development in this game. But yeah, initially I didn't. Well, at the very very early drafts of this game were actually a board game, right? I had been listening to Cole talk about Oath. I had been playing Fog of Love. I was like, let's just make this a board game where you can like talk and have a cool story afterwards, which is like my experience of playing Oath, which I love. Um, but pretty quickly, I wanted to center the storytelling more. And when you're playing a board game, you can tell stories, but like you're there to manipulate the mechanical systems. And so I abandoned the board game draft and made this storytelling game. And I pretty early on was like, yeah, what is the goal of this game? How do you win? You tell a good story together, right? That's the ultimate win state. And so I started out just sort of like writing that down and saying like, this is how you win this game. But people wanted more guidance, especially the people I was playtesting with, right? Who are like RPG curious board gamers. Board gamers love a goal. They love to have you in the first 5 minutes of the teach of the game say, how do you win? And so I gave people goal cards very begrudgingly, right? I wanted, if I was making this game just for me still, there wouldn't be any goal cards. I would just be like, you're playing a sect over 500 years of this faith. You decide what you care about. But it's good to codify things into mechanics. And so you get dealt 2 secret goal cards at the start of the game. And these goal cards care about the fractured or stable state of the faith, right? Some sects might want to actually destroy the faith and kind of go out in a blaze of glory. A lot of them want to keep it together. And then others of them care about your core value. One of these 6 cards in the middle is like a thing your sect is invested in. And so some of them say like your core value needs to be schismatic. You actually want to be an outsider. You're a reformer. Others of them say your core value needs to be the tenet. It needs to be the most important thing that the whole faith cares about, and you can sacrifice everything else to make that happen. And so then, as a sort of like salve to my soul, I gave people 2 of those cards instead of 1, right? Which is also a move directly inspired by Fog of Love. You start the game with like 5 destinies in hand, and then as the game gets more serious, as you move towards the end, you're forced to throw them out, and you end up with 1 or 2 that you can resolve. So in Keep the Faith, you have 2. They might be directly contradictory. They might be 2 copies of the exact same card. You only have to resolve one of them at the end of the game.
Interesting. So when players are actually moving through this game in front of you in playtest, do you find that they are super motivated by the win conditions, or do they get so into it that they kind of let it go a little bit and will choose the story over the outcome?
It depends on the person, right? Like I was running this game at PAX Unplugged recently, just sort of in like final tuning playtests, showing it off to some friends, and some of the people who I was playtesting with in the Unpub space who are like, like dedicated Unpub playtesters, like all love to them. We need them. They do great work, but they like love a game for a game's sake. And so they were like, okay, here's how I'm going to win. I'm going to manipulate this aspect of this value. I'm going to put this token here. I'm going to do this. I was like, what card are you playing? Like, do you want to talk about the altar or the food? And they were like, does it matter? I was like, no, you could just set it down on the card to win the game. but you have to talk to play the game. It's in the rules, right? So there are some of those folks at one extreme who are just like, every aspect card is just a mechanical counter that equals 1. But there are also plenty of people who are like, I want my sect to have a tragic end. I'm not going to achieve my goal. We're going to tell a sad story about like aspiring to better things and failing to achieve them.
Oh man, yeah, that's hilarious actually to watch both.
both extremes are really funny, and like it's so hard to design a game to capture both extremes. And to some extent, both of those players are kind of playing against the game. But it's not such a rigid game that it falls apart if you play against it.
Right, fair enough. So I guess another thing I wondered about. So when I first tested with this with you, I think it was a PAX Unplugged. Yeah,
It was
this is
two
where we
PAX
meet.
Unplugged ago.
I was very interested in the fact that the people who were playing it at that moment seemed, I think one of them might have been a minister.
Yeah,
Like,
you're
these
playing
are
Ben.
people of faith. So how do you have you noticed any differences in responses to the game between people who are coming to it as people of faith and then people who are coming to it and maybe either a cautious or even fully irreverent position?
Yeah, I haven't played with anyone who is like hyper fundamentalist. I don't really hang out with those people anymore, and also they tend not to be very playful about their religion. So it would be a hard sell, I think. But I have played it with folks, with friends of mine who are very serious, committed, believing Christians, and they tend to use the fiction as like a screen, right? It's like they will want to invest some element of like fantasy or sci-fi or some sort of distancing element, so that they can talk about the things they want to talk about that they actually believe and want to investigate. But if they need to like distance themselves and say, oh, we're not actually talking about my faith and my religion, we're talking about dragon, fairy, unicorn world. Like, cool. That's a thing I've seen happen with people who do take religion seriously, who can use the game's fiction as kind of a distancing mechanism.
Interesting. Do you find that more players go for a fantasy version of a religion, or do people end up kind of recreating versions of things that actually exist in the world?
Yeah, it's a mix. It's a mix. Like Ben, who you played with, that game that he was in. He's an Episcopal priest. Yeah, I think he goes by that gamer priest online. He's great. His religion was like very like serious and also very like dark and gothic. There was like, I think I snapped a picture of the cards. I think death, sex, and secrets all like lined up together, and it was like this like secret death cult where people like had orgies at funerals, or it was wild. And it was like, it wasn't distanced by fantasy. It wasn't like set in like in outer space. It was just like, here's this religion that exists, and it fell apart, right? It was the religions that tend to have a death cult element in this game tend to fracture. I don't know if that's just people like being narratively coherent or something mechanical in the game, but yeah, people lean into it. People do take it seriously.
Actually, that leads me to an interesting question of, so in something like Nicaea, you don't actually have to be narratively coherent in terms of the beliefs that you
right
ascribe to, which is very interesting. But do you find that people aim for coherence in games of Keep the Faith? Is that like a natural impulse?
It is, and especially because the game, like, so the core action of the game is playing these aspect cards to these values, saying, because we believe this, our observable practice looks like that. But then there are moments where these things move around, right? Where it says, okay, well, this used to be about this, and now it's about that. And so when that happens, the rules explicitly say, like, check in with the person who played that card, right? If you, Liz, played the food card to welcome the outsider, and we're like, oh, we have these big feasts, we're always welcoming people in, everyone comes and eats. And then I moved that card to like wield power, I would say, okay, well, now this expresses this value in this way. And I might check in with you, especially if we played the game, we've all been playing stories, like what happened? What did you say when you laid this card in this value? And so that kind of check-in, that kind of like movement through history, that kind of like palimpsest creates narrative coherence, right? People just want to tell a story that makes sense and not one that doesn't make sense. And if people are on the more like board gamery side of things, they don't tend to like intentionally create incoherence. They will just sort of tell with less detail.
Interesting. So what do you What player count do you think might be the best for this game? I ask, partially somebody who's play tested this with large groups and it actually did well. But also, there might be teachers listening who want to know.
Yeah, for sure. It's the box says 2 to 5, and there are only enough components for like 5 sects to exist in the game. You actually, when you ran it, did you have like multiple students in a sect, or did you make multiple copies?
I made multiple copies. So I had it was a small private school summer class. So I had like 15 to 20 kids per class.
Nice.
So I would just I had like 4 sets that I made and I just ran all the sets.
Cool. I've never tried it with like a multiplayer sect, right? Where it's like, okay, 3 people are taking 1 player position, and so there are 5 player positions, and we can have 15 players. I can imagine it would work. I can imagine there'd be difficulties that would arise, but it works. It works great at 5. I mean, that's part of why I capped it at 5. Is like it's a storytelling game. You do have some player downtime. It's like fun to listen to people talk, right? But you want it to get back to your turn, right? So I tried it once or twice at 6, and I felt like it was too unwieldy. But I mean, this isn't the answer classroom teachers want to hear. I also love it at 2, right? It's just great to just like sit down with one other person, and you can create these like real like tensions as you like kind of try and tear the faith apart, or both align, and then you're like, what is this person doing? Why are they aligned with me? What does their goal say? It also really clips along. You can even with some like detailed storytelling, you can knock out a 2-player game in like 45 minutes, which is a lot of fun.
Excellent. Yeah, I can say from experience that it worked very well at 5.
Good.
So
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
I did not have problems. So for those of you who are out there, I will be writing about this some in the curriculum guide, actually. But basically what I did was I picked points during the game to stop and ask students to stop and wait for me to give further instruction.
Cool.
And then at a certain point, I was able to just let them roll to the end and then just walk around listening in on what they were doing.
I could see like a hack. I've read other teachers writing about doing this kind of thing with board games, especially like historical simulation board games, where it's like you could have 4 tables of 5 players each, and they're moving through a shared history, but in different regions, right? And then write rules for what happens. Every round you have a check-in, and those event cards are like, oh, there's a crossover. This faith sends missionaries to this table. What happens? I haven't thought a lot about that, but I would love to do it. I would love to see someone mess around with that.
Also, just to I know that you wanted to make this game accessible for people who are maybe a little bit shy about doing RPGs. Do you feel that you have succeeded, and what things did you build in to make sure that you would?
Yeah, I do think it is a success. I mean, people are going to play what they want to play, right? So this is not like, speaking of like missionaries, right? This is not me trying to like aggressively convert non-RPG players to an RPG, right? But it is me trying to like kind of extend an open hand and say like, hey, I've had people say to me like, I'm not a creative person. I don't want to play a game where I have to sit and just BS off the top of my head and say words that doesn't sound fun to me, which I like get. I mean, I don't. I that's like one of my favorite things to do right now. I love loving exploring the RPG scene, but I get it, right? And so I was like, okay, how can this game welcome people who might want to overcome that feeling that they have within themselves, right? And teaching undergrads, teaching in like a creative field, we often use structured brainstorming exercises to get students to like fail faster, try new things out. Don't be afraid to like just say stuff in front of your peers, knowing it might be bad. And so part of this game was inspired by that, of like, okay, you have a card, it has 4 questions on it, you're going to connect it up to a value. Surely you can say 2 sentences, right? And like, if that's all you're going to do to play the game, and that's going to be fun for you, cool. Like the game wants you to do that. It wants you to play it at the basic, like what's the least you can say, and the game will still function, and it functions. And so that's kind of my vision for like welcoming people in, is like, you don't have to push yourself too hard.
That's very encouraging, I think, for people who want students to play.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I said I didn't design it with students in mind, but like part of my design impetus was inspired by teaching undergrads and thinking about how I invest them in activities that they maybe don't want to do, but I'm asking them to do anyway.
On a more personal note, how would you say that playing Keep the Faith, adjusting it, and then seeing so many other people play it has changed how you feel about religion? Like, how's the game grown you?
Yeah, it's been weird. It's like I don't necessarily want to give the game credit for my personal religious evolution, but I definitely have to talk and think a lot more about my religious positionality now because I'm like promoting this game and I've been working on this game. Um, but yeah, it's like it definitely has made me be more sympathetic to people who are more religious than me, who as someone who's sort of like journeying out of conservative Christianity, it was kind of like, man, like this is so destructive. How can you believe this? I don't like it. I don't like you. And then like making this game has made me realize like, okay, like people believe things for a reason. The manifestations of people's beliefs are maybe somewhat historically determined and not necessarily within their individual control, right? And so like building that kind of sympathy has been interesting. And then also just like realizing that like, yeah, everything is sociologically determined, right? Everything we say, I don't know, God told us X, right? And then playing Keep the Faith is kind of designed to make you realize like maybe just the people 200 years ago told you X. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm always very introspective about these questions because I feel like I'm a very religion friendly atheist,
Right.
and I got that way because I've spent so much kind of like intimate time with the New Testament, both before and after I consider myself a believer.
For sure.
And so I feel like the exposure, like I think it causes sympathy, like better thought. I just always ask.
Yeah, and I'm at this very interesting place personally where like I am absolutely culturally a Christian, right? I just started reading Talia Lavin's Wild Faith, which is about my partner saw it. She's like, is that some like Christian devotional book? I was like, no. It's about how right-wing Christianity is trying to take over America. Really good book. Talia Lavin's a great writer. But in the opening chapter, she talks about how like Christianity is like the cultural hegemonic, like she uses the example of the music that's on in the CBS. And if you're born Christian and raised Christian, whether or not you profess to Christianity at a theological level, like this is normal for you. You celebrate Christmas, like cool.
Yeah.
And she's Jewish, and so she talks about feeling the outsiderness of that, and like regardless of what I personally believe or where I end up, or like whether or not I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, like that is always going to be true for me, right? I'm always part of that dominant hegemonic force, and so I have some responsibilities in that region.
Nice. So, I guess I just want to sum up. So I kind of want to talk about some other stuff than Keep the Faith because this has led to other questions for me. But I just want to sum up for everybody. Yes, this is good with students. Yes, this is open enough for people of different faiths to give it a shot. And I actually, I've had diverse groups of students play very, very comfortably and get a lot out of it.
Some of the best feedback, again, because Central Michigan University Press is an academic press, they didn't just like sign a publication contract with me, right? They sent it out to academic reviewers. And some of the reviewer feedback was like, make sure this isn't just Christianity Simulator, the game, right? And so we've been talking a lot about Christianity because that's our personal backgrounds, but the game structurally has had a lot of work done on it to ensure that it's not that.
Yes. So the other thing I want to talk about though is, so you mentioned that you've been exploring RPG world and that you want to kind of help people slip in. So I feel like this is a good moment to talk about what if you would play Keep the Faith for fun, because it can also be played for fun. Like we're talking about as a classroom event, but you can just do this to make a religion for your D&D group. You can just do this because you want.
It's a very fun game.
But what are some other games that you think are like along the slippery slope to RPG enjoyment?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, the things that got me sort of like into the RPG side of things more were absolutely Fog of Love, Jacob Jaskov's, romance game. I don't think it's a coincidence that like his game and my game are both about sort of like taboo topics, right? Like religion, sex, politics, right? Like they want to get you talking. And so you should talk about something that is like fun and exciting and like high stakes to talk about. Absolutely love that game, but it's very board gamey. In the more like traditional RPG sphere, some stuff I've played that really was like eye-opening for me mechanically. I played The Companion's Tale, which is loved by Laura Simpson, is the designer of that game, and it's kind of a hack of inspired by A Quiet Year, which a lot of people have heard of. So both of those games are great. A Quiet Year is about like a community surviving after an apocalypse and also before an apocalypse. You have like 1 year between two disasters. And it's about like neighbors getting mad at each other and like refusing to rake the leaves because you want to go and explore the mystical tower across the way. It's a wild game. And then The Companion's Tale takes that kind of format and makes it about like postmodern literary narrative, and so you're telling the story of a hero, but it's not like you're not telling one story. One person's like, here's my story of the hero, and then somebody comes from a different side like, well, I knew him like this and I knew her like that. And really cool, really interesting kind of iteration on that system. That game doesn't get talked about enough, I think, which is why I love to talk about it. Starcrossed is a hack of dread, which is an RPG that uses a Jenga tower, but instead of your character dying when the Jenga tower falls, your two characters who, according to the subtitle of the game, really, really want to, but really, really can't. When the Jenga tower falls, they have some sort of physical moment of affection. They might have sex, they might just kiss, they might just hold hands. What's another good one? I haven't played yet. I bought Border Riding by Stout Stoat Press, which is actually a lot of similarities to Keep the Faith. It's about like a village over 1,000 years and conflicts and boundaries and stuff like that. So the RPG scene is so rich right now. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening that's not in the like, I'm in a campaign for 4 years with the same people and we all go out and fight monsters. Like there's so much more going on in that scene.
So I feel like a natural follow on to this then is, so, the last time I had you on the show was to talk about Block by Block, a board game.
Yes.
I work at Leader. You did Ahoy with us, so I feel like I see
Right.
your name all the time, even though we get to talk as much as I'd like. So I see you as a board game designer. Keep the Faith is, I would say, an accessible RPG. Where do you see your design future going based on your current interests and play preferences?
Yeah, I love the sort of like freedom to mix and match. Like I've played more RPGs and read more RPG designers writing stuff as I work on Keep the Faith, because I don't just want to like come in as a noob and make RPG mistakes that all the scene has already solved, right? Like, so I have been more in that world, but I really just like there's a real excitement and innovation in the board game scene right now. I was just talking with some other designers at PAX Unplugged. We were playing Matilda Simonson's Pax Penning and just like talking about like what a cool game that is, how it like uses its materials so creatively. And one of the people in that conversation was Marceline Lyman, who showed at the Indie Night Market. And yeah, there's weird stuff happening right now. It feels like a very fertile time in game design. I guess another person I have to shout out is Zoe Allred. Zoe, who's all about like multi-victor, non-victor games. Just the fact that it can talk about that kind of stuff is like feels like it couldn't have happened 5 years ago, right? And so as for my future design, like I want to keep exploring that. I don't know if that means I'm going to make another RPG. I do have some other board game projects kind of in the hopper, but it just feels cool to just be able to kind of like blow up some of those boundaries a little bit and be like, yeah, what is this game? I mean, from a marketing perspective, it's been so hard to talk about. I've had to do a lot of work to figure out how to call Keep the Faith as a game because these boundaries are hard to manage.
Yeah, I mean, I like it when boundaries are hard to manage for creative
Oh
reasons,
yeah,
but it is hard to stop.
100%.
And then I guess just one more serious question before we move into full softies is, how do you feel like your design for Keep the Faith, designing for the classroom, and also other aspects of your design life come back into your role as a professor? I think you were a grad student still the last time I talked to you.
Yes.
So
right.
how is being a professor of games, media, and culture doing for you, and how does it connect to your design life?
It's rad. I love my job. I get to teach so many cool students, so many cool things, and like the program that I'm in is very video games focused, understandably, right? Like that's where the energy and the money are in terms of the industry. Okay. Yes. Okay. Whatever. We don't need to talk about the problem. Video games are having a rough time right now. But it's so good to like get to work with students who haven't even considered, some of them even like games as designed objects, right? Some of them just show up. They're like, my parents said I had to go to college. I like video games. I'm going to get into a game design program. And then just to like have them be like, you have to think about what the things do. You have to think about what are the consequences. You have to think about how are you communicating to your player, right? So even just at that level is so cool. And then getting to like below their minds, a lot of them have not encountered hobby games. A lot of them have not encountered RPGs. And I get lots of excuses to play these things in the classroom with them as teaching tools. So that's awesome. The session I mentioned when I played Keep the Faith in class, I was teaching a class on games user research, right, which is like a sub-industry within the video games field. It's basically research methods for game design, right? It's like using social science research tools to conduct play tests that are like scientifically verifiable. So I teach that class, and we ran a session of Keep the Faith to talk about like interviews and focus groups and observations. And I was like, this is a game with a lot of talking, so I'm going to generate lots of words for us to like run content analyses on. So it's great. It's a lot of fun getting to like merge my hobby and my job, as like dangerous as that can be sometimes.
Yeah, I feel, although working in games is just maybe like games more.
Right.
So
right. It's so good.
I'm glad to see you thriving as well, and I'm looking forward to our next check-in. Right. So
Totally.
We talked a bit about RPGs, but what are some games you've played recently that have brought you some joy?
What has brought me joy recently? I know this question's coming because I listened to your podcast and I didn't even prepare for it. I'm in a ongoing Scum and Villainy campaign, which is a hack of Blades in the Dark. It's an RPG. I talked about it on Daniel Winter's podcast, that I just love. My co-players are incredible. They are both like RPG designers, and so we like all sort of, I'm the GM and they're the players, but we regularly sort of like collaborate to tell a story together, which is awesome. I've been playing a lot. I have a 4-year-old, soon to be 5-year-old, and we play a lot of Twisty Tracks by Jeffrey Allers. It's like one of these, I don't even know what to call them. It's like before there were roll and writes, there were a lot of these games that had like a stack of tiles where everyone had the same stack, and then it was about how you placed them out. It's one of these about trains, and he's 4 and he loves trains, and so we play this game a lot at home. What else have I been playing that's fun? My partner and I play a lot of like kitchen table Netrunner. We just like have our own little home meta and we play stuff against each other, and it's great. What's the last game I played for fun other than that? Oh, my friends brought over Art Society from Mighty Boards, which is like an auction game about art, and it has like a Tetris board filling component, so it was a lot of fun. But I don't get to play games as much as I like to, which is sad.
Yeah. I play a lot online. I've of course always playing Obsession. My recent obsession, I guess, has been backgammon.
Ooh, fun. Do you play with the doubling cube?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Awesome. Got to play with the doubling cube. Now that I've like figured out how to use it as a tool of fear and intimidation.
Yep. There's a great book. I think I referenced this in my PhD about backgammon and Greek culture, and it's just like this sort of like case study of how a game can like shape and be shaped by like a national culture.
Okay, I need to read this immediately.
I'll find it for you. It's a really good read. It's like very approachable and accessible. But this guy just like spent time playing backgammon with old Greek dudes and writing about it.
Amazing. All right, so the bonus, maybe if we get the book, I'll put it in the show notes. But for now, where can people find you online if they want to follow your work and keep the faith in any future projects?
Totally. So my personal website is gloringalbright.com. It's a mouthful, but it's not hard to type. And I'm Greg is on the go on Blue Sky. Those are the primary places to find me. Both of those have links to my personal mailing list, and probably also right now to the Keep the Faith pre-launch page. But yeah, get on there, say hey. I love chatting game design stuff with people online.
Beautiful. I too am terminally online. If you didn't know from the podcast title, you can find me anywhere online as Beyond Solitaire. Greg, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really, really excited for you, and I hope that the Keep the Faith crowdfund goes really, really well.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you like were sort of present at the beginning and end of this game. Like you helped it find a publisher home. You're writing the curriculum guide, so I'm glad we're getting to work together on this, Liz. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm the alpha and the omega, baby. All right.
Amen, hallelujah.
Everybody out there, please like, subscribe, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.